Pondering God, Chapter 41. He who thinks he stands, take heed. I recall a conversation I had with my oldest son when he was a teenager. We talked about right and wrong, decisions to be made, directions to go. He made a comment, "But Dad, you're perfect," which led me to a long and thoughtful pause and much introspection. His comment, rather than swell my head, embarrassed me. Where did he get that impression? I wondered. I knew in my heart that I was a sinner, one of the chief offenders in the line of Paul, but I must have presented myself in a way that made my son think otherwise, obvious by what he had uttered so plainly. I then thought of the Pharisees on the other end of Jesus' many woe to you statements. The Pharisees presented themselves to the average Jew as those who had arrived. They set themselves up as following God's law to the letter. They practiced the religious rituals religiously to be seen by men. If you were an average Jew, these were the men you looked up to, but certainly felt you could never attain to their righteousness, their perfection. Unfortunately for them, Jesus saw them for what they were. He called them hypocrites. I looked up the word, and here's part of the definition. A stage actor, hence one who pretends to be what he is not. So, Johnny Depp wasn't really Captain Jack Sparrow? You mean he was only pretending? It's a very dangerous thing to pretend to be what you aren't, unless you're Johnny Depp. Eventually, the mask will come off and the exposure will be harsh. I next thought about the church, congregation of believers that I attended. I noticed something about the weekly interactions between the people. Everyone tried desperately to appear to have it all together, to live the life that everyone knew they should. After all, Paul wrote to us in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 24, to put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of truth. The likeness of God? Righteous and holy? Me? In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, Paul also wrote, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." Good and perfect? Me? Was this what my son saw? Me assuming everyone else had it together and doing my best to put on the same face? I tried so hard to show my son the right way, to show him how we were all supposed to be, but at the same time, I hid my failures and shortcomings, my sins. I found out that if you pretend something long enough, you begin to believe the lie. You begin to lose the proper introspection necessary for Christ to truly transform you. I quoted Romans chapter 12, verse 2 earlier, but if you follow that verse to 12, verse 3, it says this, "For through the grace given to me, I say to every man among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment." Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5, "For God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble." King David was a man who from all appearances had it all together. He was king and could do no wrong. The people sang songs about his conquests and triumphs. Every desire he had could be his at a moment's notice. David, after a time, thought highly of himself, or as Dad used to tell me, he either got the big head or was too big for his britches. One day, when the men were off to war, David stayed behind, because he could, and found himself with nothing to do. As he gazed from the roof of his house, he saw a woman bathing, a beautiful woman. Even though she belonged to another, David was king, and his desires trumped all other considerations. After he had committed adultery with Bathsheba and had her husband Uriah murdered, Nathan the prophet confronted David concerning his sins. David later wrote in Psalm chapter 51, verse 3, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me." David realized that the best place to keep his sin was ever before me. It is healthy if we learn to see ourselves as we truly are, as God sees us. I titled this post loosely after 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. "Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed." Take heed of what? Lest he fall, finishes the verse. In David's case, It was a great fall, and too many of us, we learn this lesson the hard way. It isn't wrong to strive to live a life worthy of our calling, or to live an example to our children and those around us that pleases God. Where the hypocrisy comes in is when we think we've achieved that lofty goal or pretend that we've arrived. One of my daily prayers has been for God to keep my sin ever before me. He's done his part. There will be a day when I have arrived, the day I leave this mortal frame and trade it in for a new one. Hallelujah.